And welcome to the Grill Report here with Charles W. Kim and Nicole M. Wells. We are here today. We are going to speak about a topic where angels fear to tread in these days. We're going to be talking about the Second Amendment and gun control. How's it going, Nicole?
It's going pretty good, Charles. How about yourself?
Pretty good.
Good. So, basically this is the topic that everybody seems to be at everybody's throats for these days. You've got, your pro-Second Amendment people, you've got your anti-Second Amendment people, and then probably a whole bunch of folks caught in the middle that are kind of on middle ground when it comes to this. Neither extreme. But it was interesting because in the wake of the YouTube shooting in San Bruno, California 2 days ago, a reporter actually caught in an interview a witness to the shooting who said that he didn't have a gun, but he wished he had, which is unusual because you usually don't have comments like that wind up in interviews that are published. Usually, everybody's talking about how they were trying to get away or, what happened inside the building, but usually you don't get sentiments like that captured in interviews. So I found that rather interesting.
Well, I think it's interesting for a lot of reasons. Number one, a lot of the the gun control folks, anti-gun folks, anti-Second Amendment, when they gathered for the March for Lives in Washington, everyone said that Emma Gonzalez, who was one of the Parkland students in that shooting, she got up and she read the names of the victims and then stood in silence for about 4.5 of the 6 minutes that the gunman allegedly went through and carried out his attack. To me, this actually reinforced the case for the Second Amendment and for having armed citizens and had someone been there that could have had access to a firearm, how different things could have been. When you sit there and you listen to the 4.5 minutes of her silence, it's a long time. It's a really, really long time. And even in suburbia, in the greater New York area where we live, police, they pride themselves on being able to get to an incident within 3 to 6 minutes of a call. 3 to 6 minutes, a lot can happen that isn't good. And if someone there had a weapon, the one coach who shielded his students and died, if he had been carrying a gun, he might have been able to take action. They did have an armed security guard there and Broward County Sheriff's deputies that, for whatever reason, did not go into the building and engage the shooter and allowed those 6 minutes to take place the way they did. But it's ironic that the clarion call that Emma Gonzalez made during that March for Our Lives in Washington, when you think about it, it actually makes the case more for having a weapon. Can you imagine, Nicole, if you lived in another part of the country where the standard wasn't, we can get to a scene of an emergency in 3 to 6 minutes, but in places which is the majority of the country where it takes maybe 20 or 30 minutes for an armed officer to get to that location.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine not living on either coast where, it's densely populated. You have, urban/suburban areas where you have those response times, but most of the country, like you said, is not like that. You have, out in the Midwest, out in, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Kansas, all those kinds of places where, population centers are spread out more than they are here on the East Coast and even on the West Coast, out in California, the densely populated centers on either coast. So you don't have that response time, and it's difficult, for people to make it out alive in situations like that when you don't have any sort of defense. It's not about carrying a firearm just to carry a firearm. It's carrying a firearm to make sure you and those with you are safe and secure. And I think that's hard for people who live in these densely populated coasts to understand, because we're not living that reality. We're not experiencing that sense of taking care of oneself a lot more than I feel like we do here. Here we're very spoiled in a way, in the sense that we kind of have, law enforcement readily available here to help us take care of any sort of incidents that may occur. But everywhere is not like that, and I think it does skew people's perceptions of the reality that other people live.
Definitely. I mean, one of the things I've been on social media about and discussing with a lot of folks and debating with a lot of folks, where I come from, everybody had guns all the time. It was a rite of passage in upstate New York, and I'm not talking about the city here. There is a larger piece of New York that is indeed very wooded, very rural, and a very different culture of living than in the metropolitan area. And it's just 250 miles away from the city, along the southern tier, along the Binghamton area where I'm from. And folks there drive around with guns. I growing up in the late 60s and early in the 70s, everyone had a gun on the roof rack of their, had a rack in the back of their truck, and they had their guns on there, shotguns, 30-30s, 30-06s, Unit 22s, you name it. And they're mainly there for hunting purposes. And in upstate New York, a big rite of passage is when you turn 13, you take the hunter safety course, and you get your small game license to hunt rabbits and things. And that is a milestone for most. And at the time, I'm not trying to be sexist, but remember, I did late 60s, early 70s. It was mainly the young men, and it was a badge of honor that you went and you got your hunter safety course, and you were able to go out and hunt small game. And then when you turned 16, you got your big game license, you were able to go out and hunt deer. And we closed schools up there on the first day of deer hunting season, because all the students of age were in the woods. And no one was going around shooting up anything. I mean, you used to bring guns to school. There was, some of our schools had shooting teams. After school, you went and you, like a sport after school, you went out and you shot. And it's what you did. And, and you look at the change in that culture. And the thing I would ask is, and maybe you can help me out with this, Nicole, what do you think has changed? I mean, the availability of guns, like I say, everybody had them. We're late 60s, early 70s. Everybody had them. But no one was shooting up schools. What do you think has changed with this recent epidemic, or this thing of school shootings since Columbine?
Well, I think the basic thing that's changed is the structure of society. I mean, if you look at the way society was structured back when you're talking about in the late 60s, early 70s, society was very different than it is today. There was more of a structure to it. The family unit was very much intact, whereas today it is not very, to say the least. You had people understood what was expected of them. There were boundaries. There were expectations. And I feel like each generation since has walked more and more away from that, has strayed more and more away from that. And I think that, the more broken the family unit becomes, the more you don't have institutions in society to guide people through civilized behavior, the more you're going to have incidents like this, because there's nothing to tell people how to behave. There's nothing to tell them how to act. There's no sense of what's expected, that this is not acceptable behavior, that you don't vent your frustrations or your, your anger towards someone by taking a gun and, shooting people at a school or a movie theater or whatever the arena is. You just don't do that. And I think that the more the family unit breaks down, the more you don't have institutions like churches, like civic groups, like social clubs, and especially the family unit. The more you don't have those things, the more society becomes not civilized, in the sense that you're seeing now. It's all kind of been fermenting, and it's all kind of coming to fruition now, in the sense that you're seeing all of these acts of violence.
Yeah, you're seeing them, and a lot of it, I think, has to do with there is a lack of respect for the value of any life, of any life, and when people don't value or show compassion or humanity to another human being, I think we're in a very dangerous place. And I think we're seeing kind of the fruits of that now. There doesn't seem to be a basic, for the last, 20 or 30 years, it goes back to how we, and I'm 55, so I blame this on my own generation, the end of the baby boomers. We failed. We have failed as parents. Miserably.
Well, I think that failing perhaps came from a well-intentioned place. I mean, I don't think anybody of the boomer generation woke up one morning and said, well, golly gee, today is a good day. We're going to fail a whole generation. I don't think that was the case. I think that the boomers were kind of responding to what they saw as, a little bit of a harsher upbringing than they would have liked for themselves, and they said, well, we're not going to do that to our kids. Our kids are going to have it a little bit easier than we did. And I think that's probably where it came from. But handing out, participation trophies and gold stars, for showing up for the day, I don't think is really the formula for success for anyone. Failure is a good thing. It teaches people, and people learn from their mistakes when they fail. When they make mistakes, when, they don't always get, honored, in school, or on the sports field or whatever. But so I think that it did come from a good intention place. I just think it didn't turn out quite the way everyone wished it would have. Because you have a generation of kids that don't understand what it means to fail, don't understand, what's expected of them, because everything's always been given to them.
I think, in addition to that, I agree with everything you said. I think you're spot on. But in addition, I think that this notion that we've had raising our kids, that they are 100% special and they can't do anything wrong, it's amazing. It's amazing. And in 20 years as a journalist, you take note of things. And one of the things I've learned from covering boards of education is the number of parents that get up during the public portion at various board meetings going back over the last 20 years, and it's something like, well, my child, this happened and it wasn't fair to my child, and, well, my child couldn't have done this, or my child shouldn't have to do that. And that's such a big difference from the generation that I grew up with. I mean, I cannot think of one adult who, unless there was something really egregious, something so obviously wrong it wasn't funny, but I can't think of one adult during my time growing up that would have come out kicking and screaming the Board of Education, well, why did you discipline my child? Why did you suspend my child? Why did you... Most of the time when those things happened, and you went home, whatever the school did to you, your parents were going to do far worse. And we've seen that get totally flipped on its head in a very distorted way now, where you come home and, yeah, Mom, I was beating on this kid, and I got suspended for 3 days. The first thing Mom's going to do is run down to the principal and say, why are you suspending my child? Really good. Going back to Parkland really quick. During her speech, and it wasn't really picked up on so much at the time, but now it is. We've been able to parse a bit of what Emma Gonzalez said. Actually, not at the Washington rally, but during a time when she was at a rally prior to that, shortly after the shooting at Parkland, where she admits. Now, this is Emma Gonzalez, openly bisexual, openly a member of the LGBTQ community. She even ran a chapter of it for her high school. She admits she was one of the students bullying the shooter from middle school, since middle school. This, of all the groups, of all the things that have been going on in the last 10 or so years, of all the groups that cry the loudest about being bullied, being oppressed, being not treated fairly, this leader of one of those groups was one of the people bullying the shooter that eventually killed 17 people at her school.
I saw an article. I didn't read the actual article. I just saw the headline on social media the other day, and it was put out by Ann Coulter, and it said, basically she was saying that there used to be a time when we cared about each other. And that's just such a profound statement, because that pretty much just sums up everything about America today. There used to be a time when we did care about each other, and it wasn't so much progressive, conservative, Republican, Democrat. Everybody was more of a centralist than on either pole, and we did care about each other, and there wasn't as much fracturing into our splinter groups, as to how we identified. We were simply Americans. It wasn't, I'm I'm bisexual, I'm asexual, I'm transgender, I'm, white, straight, heterosexual, whatever. It was, first and foremost, you were Americans, and things like civics classes in school taught you that. You learned you were an American first, and whatever you were after that, you were an American. And like I was saying before about, your family units, your churches, they taught kids things like, don't beat the snot out of each other in the sandbox, show a little bit of kindness, show a little bit of compassion. They may not be like you, but, there's no reason you have to torture them daily. And I'm not assigning blame here to either side in that particular case. I'm simply saying that in general, I feel that we were all once a little bit kinder to each other, and it wasn't so corrosive a society.
I definitely agree with that. I mean, certainly during my time when I was growing up in high school, there was bullying. I was a victim of bullying, and other people were bullied. But there was also a difference, in a sense. It was not pleasant to go through, do not get me wrong. It was very trying at times and very, very rough. But there also was a sense of community where even in school, if there was a kid that was getting picked on for whatever reason, if somebody outside of that community tried to pick on that kid, you know, we would all be the first to stand up for him. You know, it's kind of like you have a brother or sister in your house and you pick on your little brother or little sister, but if somebody from the outside tries that, you know, they're in trouble. I think we've lost that. I think that sense of we are all in this together, and yeah, we might pick on each other a little, we might be this or that, but in the end, we all pull together. One of the best examples I can think of, and this happened right about the time I was born. I mean, I don't remember it firsthand because I was only 11 months old, but from my parents, you know, and the video and written record. I mean, John Kennedy was not the world's most popular president in 1963. He had issues. I mean, he went to Dallas because politically he was in trouble there for the 64 election. So he went down there with his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, which was somebody he picked in order to pull votes from the South. You know, and I mean, there were circulating posters around there wanted for treason with John F. Kennedy's face on it, for a variety of stances that he took on a variety of issues. Yet, when he was assassinated in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, the entire country came together, much in the same way we did it in 9/11. How we came together despite political, and we had just gone through one of the most contentious and troubling and disconcerting presidential elections in our history. One of the with Bush Gore in 2000, where the Supreme Court eventually got involved, and you know, kind of turning the tide into how that election went. There were a lot of people who hated President George W. Bush. Now, this I'm talking about before the Iraq War, and you know, the Bush's second term. Obviously, you know, the public opinion of him dropped dramatically, but certainly in the days right after 9/11, the entire nation was behind our president and our flag and our country, and we were unified and we were all together. You know, the funny thing is during that time, a lot of people said that as time passed by, that people would forget, and that sense of patriotism and unity and everything that we felt in the days immediately following 9/11 would go away. And we all thought that was crazy because we had never seen anything like 9/11. We had never seen an attack like that. And it brought us together in such a powerful way, yet...
Well, we had never seen it, except we had. It's just our generation hadn't.
Very good point.
I mean, you know, the generations, for the most part, I mean, I'm sure there are still survivors that meet, you know, periodically, but for the most part, most of the living generations did not witness Pearl Harbor. You know, that's probably the closest thing that we had to 9/11, and not many of us were there. You know, as the years go by, the number of survivors dwindle every year that meet, you know, at Pearl Harbor. So probably in living memory, this is the only thing we have to hang on to in terms of unity as a society. But, I mean, Pearl Harbor was technically the first attack by a foreign entity on American soil.
Well, since 1812, since the British came over and burned down the White House and such.
Since the original attackers, we'll just say that. However, but we've since made up and made friends, and now we have a very special relationship with England.
Really?
I don't really know that we can call it Great Britain anymore, seeing as how Brexit happened. It's just England now. But
I don't know. I really don't. I really don't think that Theresa May is going to invite President Trump to her family's weddings or anything.
Well, maybe not. But we have yet to see the guest list for Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, so who knows?
That'd be huge.
Stay tuned on May 19th. But yeah, I mean, that was the first real instance of the country pulling together like that. And I think it's harder as we go on to pull together like that because we are so fractured in terms of how we identify. Everything today has become identity politics. And you know, apparently supporting the Constitution and the Second Amendment plays right into that. There are people who support the Constitution and the Second Amendment, and there are people who think that the Second Amendment is an antiquity that needs to be disposed of. You know, so we're all fractured and we're all splintered into our little groups as to how we identify today, and that makes for a very difficult time in terms of trying to remember that we're all Americans first.
And I think that's a very good point, and I think it's a very good segue and a very good tease. We're going to step back for a couple minutes, play some music for you, and then we're going to come back on the other side, and we're going to exactly go into the Second Amendment because it's important. You know, it's a big part of this discussion, especially when it comes to gun control or gun legislation, and as to what that means. And I think a little bit of context needs to be added before we go real crazy on this and decide, oh, we need to repeal this. We'll talk about that more on the other side. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Grill Report. This is Charles W. Kim here with Nicole Wells, and we are dealing with the Second Amendment, gun control, and related issues. And we left off, Nicole, you were talking about the actual Second Amendment itself before we went to break.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think that the Second Amendment is such a touchy issue today, especially because of all of the mass shootings that have occurred throughout the country. But I think that it's a touchy issue because it speaks to people's basic desires of being able to protect themselves and their families in areas of the country where they're pretty much all that stands between, you know, them and harm to themselves or their families. You know, it's not as if everywhere in the country, you know, the police have a 3 to 6 minute response time. It's not the case in a large part of the country. So I think that it's a very touchy subject for a lot of people because, you know, they feel as though their right to defend themselves and their families is potentially being infringed on by people who would seek to take that away in the name of public safety.
Well, there is of course that famous quote by Benjamin Franklin that anyone who gives up part of their liberty for security deserves neither liberty nor security.
Well, I think Benjamin Franklin, you know, I'm sure someone somewhere in revisionist history classes will find some reason to discredit Benjamin Franklin because that's kind of going on all over the country for various historical figures. which is a whole other separate discussion about,
That's for another day.
I mean, we could go on and on about that, but let's just leave it at that. You really can't look at historical figures through modern lenses and expect things to be all hunky-dory. But I think that he really was onto something there. I mean, he certainly had a unique perspective for a lot of things, and without him, we certainly wouldn't have a lot of things. But I'm sure we will forget that conveniently at some point.
Well, I'm sure we will as well. We want to do this, I guess, the right way. Let's start by just reading straight up the actual Second Amendment.
Well, thank goodness this is the English, because the cursive version, American high school students can't possibly be bothered to understand because they can't even read it, as one social media user commented recently.
I know, it's amazing. Now, I will tell you again, being as ancient as I am and living in the time I did, penmanship was never my strong suit.
Well, having seen your penmanship, I can attest.
Yes, I would not even try to defend that. I make a doctor's handwriting look legible. But
you may have taken the same class in high school.
Yeah, and I did well in that one. But yeah, we had the line paper. We had to sit there for hours and hours with our capitals and lowercase and all that. Oh, by the way, I got a question for you. This was a joke given to me yesterday, and I can you tell me why Karl Marx always writes in a lowercase cursive?
Let me think about this. Something to do, I want to say, with capitalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's against capitalism. All right. Enough aside. So, to get back on point here, to read Amendment Number 2 of the Bill of Rights, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, to me, that's pretty clear. I don't know why folks tend to muddy the waters on this. To me, it's pretty clear. But then again, I know the context of history. And Nicole, I'm sure you do as well, as to what was going on when this amendment was crafted.
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny because you see some of these these reporters that go around just America in general, but in particular college campuses because they seem to provide so much amusement. And you ask, basic knowledge of history, and nobody seems to know. It's like everyone was asleep when they were teaching history, basic things. So, we're going to have a refresher for those who might not know, but
yes.
The reason the Second Amendment was and is so important is because they had just got done fighting a war for their liberty, and they weren't about to have it infringed upon by any sort of government that might, in the course of history, become tyrannical yet again. I mean, if you look at it through that lens, these are people who had risked everything from the neck up, okay? Everything. Their life, their livelihood, their freedom to move about, without being shot on spot as a treasonous traitor. These people, with all of their foibles and their flaws and their shortcomings, as I'm sure it will be pointed out, they had risked everything to establish a new state from a government that they felt was oppressive. And, so they could certainly well see the process happening again, the cycle happening again, where, this government that they worked so hard to establish becoming a tyrannical government that was not with the wishes of the people, that did not have the people's, best interest at heart. And so they wrote in there a safeguard. It's awful hard as a government to oppress a people that has a way of fighting back, that has a way of pushing the reset button, should, the government become an oppressive state. So I think that that's why it was written the way it was. I don't think that, that's terribly off base in light of the circumstances in which it was written.
And if you look at the Bill of Rights, okay, the Second Amendment we just talked about the right to keep and bear arms. Look at Amendment number 3, which follows immediately after. And remember, these were all written the same day. These were all agreed upon by the Convention of States on March 1 and in 1789, and these were all came together at the same time. Amendment 3: no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in a time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. So basically, one of the big problems during the Revolution, prior to the Revolutionary War actually, and through until we won, the British would send their redcoats, and if they chose to, they would use your house to put them up instead of building barracks for them. Because you got to remember, these guys are coming over from England. It's not like they're coming over here, and it's not like we had a Best Western set up.
Jeez,
or
why not? Come on now.
Or a Holiday Inn Express.
Hospitality.
Or Extended Stay Americas. These folks, they had a choice that they could either come over and build them barracks for them to quarter in, or a little easier way, hey you colonist, you're taking us in tonight, or for the week, or for the month, or for however much time, and what are you going to do? They got the guns, they got the bayonets, they have the authority of the King of England. What are you going to do? Not a lot. And if they decide they want to come into your house and eat the food, and you have to remember, back in back during the Revolutionary War, it wasn't just like, oh yeah, well, boy, we're running low on eggs, or we're running low on chicken. We'll just run out to the nearest ShopRite and grab us some more groceries.
Oh, it's got to be more fun than that. We got to make a Target run.
Yeah, and you couldn't just do that. These families in that time, your provisions that you got for yourself and your family and you put away, they had to carry you through the winter, or you died. Or you died. So to have members of an army come in, soldiers, and eat up your provisions, and who knows what other things they may do. They rape your wife, rape your daughter, whatever, pillage your house. What are you going to do? They're armed. They have the authority of the state. What are you going to do? That is what was happening. That's why there's an amendment to the Constitution that says no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in a time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Martial law, basically. And there isn't really anything today that would stop the U.S. government at any point in time, if it so chose to say, okay, we declare martial law. And we're going to have soldiers staying in people's houses because we can't build fast enough to quarter them. Although today does not really hold true as much as it did then. But still, that amendment follows directly under the Second Amendment, because if you have a gun and you have the right to have a gun in your home, and that's one of your citizenship, inalienable God-given rights to defend you and your property and the people and your family, it's a lot harder for a soldier to come in and take over your house when you're armed. It's a lot harder for a soldier with the support of a state, foreign or domestic, to come to your home and destroy your security and your safety. And look at Amendment 4, which follows 2 and 3. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So now if you look at 2, 3, and 4, and you look at them together, okay, and again, these were written pretty much the same day and voted on and agreed to the same day. They all have a common theme. What do you think, Nicole? Can you see the common theme running between these 3 amendments?
The government shall stay the hell out of everyone's business as much as possible and allow the persons of this country to live their lives unviolated.
And if they choose not to do that and they choose to infringe where they shouldn't,
well, then there's grounds for resetting the government. I mean, it's written right there, so...
Right, it's right in the Bill of Rights. And if you look at these two together, it's about security. The security of each individual citizen to be able to feel secure in their persons, houses, in their papers. Boy, we could go on the whole thing on that and, talk about Facebook and stuff.
Well, that actually would be a really interesting discussion, because I don't know if Facebook would be, and Twitter, Instagram, if all of that would be constituted as papers. That's very interesting, actually.
Well, papers at the time, that would be your writings, your...
Well, yeah, I mean, I understand that.
Your business.
I just find that interesting as to how that would be translated legally today. But anyhow...
Well, we'll have to do a show on that. That would be a good one. That would actually be a really good one.
It'd be very interesting.
But going back to this, everybody, or not everybody, but a large group of folks say that this is obsolete. Oh, the United States government, they would never turn on their own people.
Why not? It's happened around the world, various governments in various times. Does Germany ring any bells? I mean, that's number one. I mean, it's not unheard of for a government entity to turn on its own people. I mean, look at, in modern day North Korea, starving its own people, and feeding them all kinds of lies and propaganda, and starving them, depriving them of basic nutrition. I mean, it's not so out of the pale, and people that sit there and implicitly trust the government from cradle to grave, I have to wonder why they think that any sort of safety or security is guaranteed to them by the government. Governments are made up of men and women, but I'm using the term men largely as the race of men.
You better be careful with that.
Just to make sure that we're not, bothering any sort of feminists. But anyhow, men and women make up the government, and they have their own agendas that motivate them. And that was what the founders were trying to safeguard against with these amendments to the Constitution.
Well, I think another thing, too, is that something that a lot of students, even in college today, are not very familiar with. And they go in, if you read the Federalist Papers.
The Federalist what?
The Federalist Papers.
The what?
Now you're being snarky. The Federalist
Always.
Papers. If you read those in connection with our founding documents, the writers of those documents, through the Federalist Papers, make the case over and again. We've got to be careful here, guys. Even in this thing that we created, that we're creating with the best of intentions and with the best forethought that we can come up with, this can be corrupted. This can be distorted. And one of the big things, now, of course, since the election with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, should we get rid of the Electoral College? This is a perfect example. The reason the Founding Fathers came up with the Electoral College, twofold. One, and it's very true, that certainly the education system was not quite what it is today. And there were a lot of folks during that time that did not have a really solid education. So these electors who were appointed by the state legislators, they, and voted by the people, they were, kind of the educated upper end of the population. So in case, and one of the big things they say in the Federalist Papers is they wanted, and our government moves very slowly, plods along on purpose. Just so there aren't knee-jerk reactions and knee-jerk policies that put us down a bad road that is in violation of the basic tenets of our nation. Our system is designed to not get so much done. Just because when you do something like that and you kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater, that's what can lead to bigger problems down the road long term. And the Electoral College is a very good example of that. First of all, in order to become President of the United States, is actually a two-process thing. The people get to vote. The masses have their say. Okay?
Well, the ones that turn out on election day.
Yeah, the ones that turn out.
The ones that actually educate themselves on the issues and who stands for what and why you should vote for them and vote for the issues and not identity. Those actually are the ones that vote. Not everyone, but maybe about half if we're lucky.
If we're lucky.
If we're lucky.
And so they turn out and vote, and they pick someone to be president. Now, if you were going to go with just the popular vote, Hillary Clinton won the last election by 3 million votes. But that's not the way it works. And oh, by the way, everybody knew the rules going into this. So the hand-wringing and pearl-clutching post-election, oh, it should never have been, we should get rid of the Electoral College. No. Because everybody would have campaigned differently. They would have stayed in New York and California and Texas.
But why is that fair to the rest of the country?
Exactly. That's point number 2 as to why the Electoral College was formed. The Electoral College, in order to win the presidency of the United States, you have to win basically more than half of the states. You have to win, it's electors, which are based on your number of your senators and congressmen, and that's how many electors you get. But you have to win a majority of the states to become president of the United States, not just the majority of the popular vote. Because, as we saw, if you took away California, just the winning margin that Hillary had in California and New York, if you just take away those two, just the winning margins, she loses the election. I think between both states, she was up 4 million. You take that away from those two states, she loses the popular vote. And so if we were going to do it just based on the popular vote, then we might as well just have California and New York vote, and whoever wins, wins. The rest of the country, who cares? Flyover, as they say. But the reason our founders did what they did was to make sure that whoever was representing our nation had a mandate from a majority of the states connected to this republic and to this union. Now, just because you don't get the outcome you wanted doesn't mean you throw into the trash the whole system. It has held very good for more than 240 some years. There's no reason, and it's just because, was it 3 times, maybe 4 times throughout our entire history, the winner of the popular vote did not become president. It happened like 4 times, twice in the last 16 years, with Al Gore and now with Hillary Clinton. You know, personally, I have 2 words for that. Oh well.
I mean, it happened before the 2000s.
Yeah, I don't remember which elections actually, but I think there's at least one, if you go back, where the candidate who won the presidency did it through the Electoral College and lost the popular vote. I think there's at least one other case of that.
That's amazing, because to hear everyone talk, it's just a recent phenomenon.
And it's only happened to the Democrats, heaven forbid. That's probably because when it happened initially, there were only Whig parties. There wasn't a Democratic Party.
I smell a conspiracy. But anyway.
A vast Whig conspiracy?
A vast right-wing conspiracy.
No, a Whig conspiracy is coming 200 years it took it to happen.
Huh. Those Whigs, they were forward-thinking. Right out of business they were. But anyhow.
Okay, so, but the Federalist Papers make very clear, and they make the point over and over again, if you bother to read them.
Well, therein lies the dilemma. I mean, how long are modern people's attention spans? I mean, look at all the social media platforms. Just look at them. I mean,
mine's the generation that started Schoolhouse Rock. Maybe we need Federalist Papers Rock or something for...
There's an idea. Who are those Schoolhouse Rock people? Because we should really contact them and get on this. I'm surprised they didn't actually do Federalist Papers Rock.
Maybe that's an idea to come up with here.
You know, we should do something with that.
My rule is bad. It will make you sad.
I think we should really look into that. But we need to find those people. Anyhow.
But in the Federalist Papers, they talk about the fact that a nation can totally mess itself up and totally go down bad paths regarding individual liberty if you just go by the knee-jerk reaction of the moment. Because things happen, and like in the case of Parkland and the debate over gun control in the last several years, you know, the 2 most horrific, of course, Sandy Hook and Parkland.
Well, in terms of school shootings.
And Columbine.
School shootings.
The school shooting.
There are
others. Well, I mean the fact that the children were victims.
Yes.
I think probably that's the most horrific of any of the, you know, the Pulse nightclub, they were pretty much adults. San Bernardino, pretty much adults. YouTube, pretty much adults. But, well, nobody died in YouTube. But, Las Vegas. How could I forget Vegas? Well, that had the highest body count. But I think probably, you know, for most people, they would look at the children being killed as more horrific.
I think it's hard to say.
Well, anytime you lose a life, it's horrific. It's I mean, you know, not trying to minimize.
No, absolutely.
Any of the events.
I'm just saying that I think it would be tough to say, and it would depend on the metric you're used to measure.
But certainly, those 2 pull at the heartstrings. I think of most Americans, probably even more so.
Probably.
And
I mean, unless you were there, you know, and experienced it, in which case I think that particular one would pull at your heartstrings a little bit more because you were there.
Yeah.
But no, I understand what you're saying.
And oh, by the way, you know, through all this, we got to say, you know, the survivors at Parkland have every right to make their opinions known and for their voices to be heard.
Oh, absolutely. That's guaranteed in the First Amendment.
That's guaranteed in the First. And my question to those who would like to see the Second Amendment repealed. First of all, by the way, when it comes to gun control, everybody out there who is looking for gun control, ban on any kind of weapons, it's actually really easy. You don't have to go through the song and dance and blame the NRA and blame this and blame that. If you have enough people behind you, all you have to do is pass an amendment to the United States Constitution repealing the Second Amendment. You get a number of legislatures to vote that way. You get it ratified and passed, and you get it passed by 3/4 of the states. And it's a done deal. We did it with Prohibition. There was an amendment to the Constitution that outlawed alcohol. Several years later, oops, bad idea. Let's repeal that.
Well, I mean, it helped create an industry. Look at NASCAR.
Al Capone.
Look at NASCAR. I mean, where would we be without prohibition to help jumpstart NASCAR?
Right. And Bo and Luke Duke, but we won't talk about them because of the Confederate flag on top of their car.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion.
But it can be done. If everyone, having this March for Lives and all these people, the political party has been using this to make hay. Oh, well, you want to vote in this particular political party because therefore, well, you know what? It shouldn't be about a political party. It shouldn't be about Democrats or Republicans. It should have nothing to do with them. Nothing. If you have the support, and the reason I think that the folks who are for banning weapons and all that, why they're playing this game with the background checks and the types of weapons, and I'm going to get into that in a minute because I think it's very important for people to really understand what they're talking about when they say we're going to ban assault weapons. We have to have a discussion about that. We have to talk about that separately, and we will very shortly. But when they're talking about that, they're using it to make political hay for their own party, for their own partisan reasons, instead of dealing with the issue. If we really want to get rid of the Second Amendment, all you gotta do is convince 3/4 of the people in all the states that that's what you want to do. Personally, I don't see that happening. How about you, Nicole?
Well, I don't see it happening because, like we talked about previously, most of America does not live in an urban area or even a suburban area. Most of America lives in areas where it's more remote. Apart from the coasts, which are densely populated, you don't have people that would be on board with that idea because they need to be able to defend themselves and their families in the event something does happen. Who are you going to call? In the words of Ghostbusters, who are you going to call? You pretty much have to rely on you, knowing that help may not be coming for a while, and you got to be able to take care of yourself and depend on you, and that's pretty much it. We only have the luxury of depending on other people on the coasts.
I agree. And perhaps the last point we're going to get to here is, what is an assault rifle? Folks are talking about an assault rifle ban. First of all, there is no such thing as an assault rifle. Okay? Assault is a verb. If your gun is sitting in its closet, it's not an assault rifle. If I have a musket from 1700 and I put it in my hands and I shoot somebody with it, then it's an assault rifle. Okay? The AR-15s are the gun du jour. In the 80s, it was the AK-47s, whatever, because they look scary, they look military. But there are wooden deer rifles that do the exact same thing. They're semi-automatics. When you put a magazine of 15 or 10 or 15 shots in there, every time you pull the trigger, one of those bullets is going to go off. It's going to be the same for the AR-15 as for a different brand of gun altogether. AR means Armalite, by the way, and is a brand of gun. Doesn't mean assault rifle. AR means Armalite. Now, that gun, if you say you want to ban semi-automatic weapons, and depending on the wording that Congress uses, and yeah, we can really trust them, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Automatically, if we ban this type of weapon based on what the weapon does, 70% of all rifles in the United States automatically become illegal. 70, maybe higher, 70 or more percent of legally purchased and registered weapons will become illegal. and people will have to turn them in.
Well, those are just rifles, correct?
Yeah, we're just talking about semi-automatic.
Well, yeah, but what's interesting is that, from what I understand, most of the gun crimes in America are committed with handguns, not with rifles.
98%. By the way, you want to know the amount committed by these scary-looking, bad, nasty rifles? You know how many people are killed, percentage-wise, with those?
How many?
2%. All this, we're going to solve the problem. Yeah, we're going to solve 2% of the problem.
Well, you're going to solve 2% of the legal problem. You're not going to solve 2% or even more of the illegal problem.
No.
And
no.
most of the gun crimes committed in America are of the illegal gun problem variety.
Right. You look at places like Chicago or Baltimore or Camden.
All of those
New
places somehow have gun control.
Mm-hmm.
Especially Chicago. I mean, that gun control is working out well over there. Let me tell you.
Well, you know what's funny is the YouTube shooting that just happened this week was in California. And it happened to be in the area, close to the Bay Area of San Francisco. Now, you can't get a bigger left-wing liberal bastion, I would argue, than the sanctuary city of San Francisco.
Are you quoting someone?
This is Dianne Feinstein's home state, her territory. And this is where, with strict gun control and, run by the left side of the political spectrum for years, as is Chicago, as is Baltimore. And yet, here is where all the gun violence is. Now in Chicago, people go across the border to Indiana and buy their guns. And then I really don't think in the south side of Chicago,
They're buying guns. Probably not.
I don't even think most of those people can get to the state line on a daily basis. Okay?
It's doubtful.
These are not socioeconomically mobile people. And if you've ever spent a day in your life when you haven't had $5 in your pocket, getting around can be a challenge, even to go 4 miles up the road.
I think it's safe to say you're not hailing an Uber.
Yeah, you're not hailing an Uber or Lyft to go buy guns
Across state lines.
To come back and commit crimes.
That's an awful lot of planning, too. I mean, if you think about it.
Yeah. To those that do, but the thing is that all these arguments that are being made, when you look at them so we're going to go crazy about this thing with we're going to ban 70% of the rifles that people across the country own to solve 2% of a problem. Let me say that again. We are going to ban, effectively, 70% or more of the rifles in the United States of America, which are semi-automatics, to solve 2% of the gun violence problem. And oh, by the way, half of the gun deaths annually, suicides. They're not something where somebody's going out. The only thing people are doing is shooting up themselves.
Well, and that goes back to the mental health.
And that goes back to mental health
issues.
and other issues. It's not the gun, it's whoever's got their finger on the trigger that's making these decisions. And the value, respecting the value of life, whether it's yours or someone else's. But the thing is that half of whatever number you want to espouse for gun deaths, I mean, over the last few years, out of the population of 350 million, like 400 people have died because of gun violence, or because of these kind of mass shooting events over like the last decades or whatever. 400. Out of 350 million people, between 9 and 11 teenagers die every day in the United States of America from texting and driving accidents. 9 to 11 teenagers die every day in the United States due to texting and driving accidents. Should we ban cell phones? Should we ban cars? Should we increase the age to get a driver's license to, well, they say insurance companies won't even consider you like, the best rate until you're at least 25, because then you're the most mature. Should we raise the driving age to 25? Should we get rid of cars? Should we get rid of cell phones? Well, we're going to save more lives. If the whole point of all this legislation and stuff is to make life safer and save more lives, I say forget the guns. Let's ban cell phones. Because not only are you saving the lives of the 9 to 11 teenagers, but you're saving the lives of anyone they may crash into. What do you think, Nicole?
I think you kind of have to draw the line somewhere. I think that it's a slippery slope, and you start down something, like we were talking about with baby boomers, best of intentions, raising a generation the way that they were raised. But I think that, you start down that path and it's just going to descend into lunacy. Where does it end? At what point do we say this is enough, this is ridiculous? People just need to start acting like people again, essentially, is what it comes down to. And I thought it was interesting when you were talking earlier about the how people view other human lives today and the value people place on human lives. And I know all of our people who may listen to this out there, I know they're not all going to be of particular religious persuasion. However, being Catholic, there is a document called Humanae Vitae. It's an encyclical that was written by Pope Paul VI, 1968. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, basically, it was discussing artificial birth control. And in it, he had said that artificial birth control was not the route that humanity should go down because it would do a number of things. Among them, it would decrease the value people place on life. The sanctity of human life would not be seen as such by people because it would devalue and commoditize human life. And I think it's very interesting because that's pretty much where we're at with the way that people view other people. It's not, so much a gift of another human being. It's, what can you do for me? How are you going to help better me? What am I going to get out of you? And that's kind of where we're at with society, and I find it just very interesting that, perhaps that is playing into the culture exactly as he said it would. I know there's people who don't believe in Catholicism, in organized religion at all. Being a believer myself, I think that that's very interesting to bring up to this discussion as to how people see other people and how that plays into, these acts of violence toward others.
I think you make a very good point there, and we need to do a whole nother show on that. There are a couple issues there I think that tie in that need to be discussed on their own, including abortion, the right to choose.
Oh, that's definitely a whole nother show. That's a whole nother show. I mean, that's on par in terms of the fever pitch of arguments on both sides. I mean, right now, that's perennially, a argument that people have, but when people have it, it's as fever pitch as the argument about the Second Amendment is right now. So definitely that would be a whole nother show, because you could go on forever on both sides playing devil's advocate, regardless of what side of the argument you're on.
Well, maybe we'll take a look at that for a future show. But that's going to actually be, that's all the time we got. Wish we had longer.
That's it for us for tonight.
So stay tuned. Remember to see the Grill Report. We'll have our shows on the radio here. And also we'll have podcasts available on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page. And please, feel free to respond, comment. We'd like to know what you think, whether you agree with us, disagree with us. Please let us know, and we will do our best to get back to you. So until next time, this is Charles W. Kim and Nicole M. Wells, and we'll see you next time on the Grill Report.